Hi, it's John Binnie. Today I'm here to talk with you and to meditate with you in practicing and learning how best to create and define your own boundaries, how to keep yourself feeling safe and to nurture your inner child and to be able to assert your boundaries. So before I talk for a while, I'd like you to join me, if you choose to, in a short mindful meditation. And this will just be a couple of minutes long. And I'll set the intention to help us connect with the feeling of boundaries and also how to practice these. So if you'd like to join me, we'll begin by taking in a deep breath through the nose. And breathe out what no longer serves our highest good, nice and loud. Breathe in through the nose, nice and deep. And breathe out any fear, shame, anxiety, or pain, nice and loud. And once more, breathe in through the nose, nice and deep. And breathe out any remaining low vibration energy or emotion that no longer serves your highest good, nice and loud. And continue to breathe deeply and calmly. And bring your attention now to the center of your heart, your beautiful soul and your beautiful heart. And from the center of your heart, I'd like you to expand a golden bubble of protective light to about 2 meters out, above, below, in front, and behind and to each side to surround you. And this golden bubble you're creating is a protective, energetic, and physical boundary. And join me now as we define our own unique boundaries. It is our sovereign, divine right to define our own boundaries uniquely. We do not have to justify our boundaries to anyone. We don't even have to justify them to ourselves. To know that whatever you create is perfect for you at this time. And so on the inside of the boundary, first of all, we will choose 3 different feelings. Please join me as we take a breath in and allow ourselves to receive the first feeling that we choose to cherish, to nurture, and cultivate within our boundaries. Breathe in through the nose. And breathe out now. Knowing that your first choice of your first boundary that you allow inside of your safe space within your golden bubble is your choice. And you can come back to this and change it at any time. I chose a feeling of self-love. And now breathe in through the nose. And receive the second feeling that you accept within your safe space, within your boundary, and breathe out. And I chose mutual love. And breathe in through the nose. And breathe out once more. Allowing yourself to receive that third feeling that you accept within your boundaries. I chose mutual respect. And I'd like you to know that you can come back to this meditation as many times as you wish, daily if you choose. Selecting, refining, and cultivating your inner boundaries. Now bring your attention to the outside boundary you created. Filling the inside, first of all, with all of those feelings from the first, second, and third boundaries you created. Allow your love to expand out to fill this whole golden bubble around you. This is your auric field. This is your energy. These are your love languages. These are the things that you cultivate and nurture within you, that cultivates safety, that protect your heart, that nurture and grow, listen to and act on yourself and your inner child, every aspect of you. And bring your attention to what's going on outside of your boundaries. Feel your boundaries as strong, invincible castle walls. I'd like you to join me now in choosing 3 things that you reject from the outside of your boundaries. And we'll do so again by repeating the pattern of breathing in through the nose. And define the first thing, the feeling that you reject from your boundary, your castle wall. I chose to reject hate. Once more, breathe in through the nose, nice and deep. Receive your second boundary, the feeling that you reject, and breathe out nice and loud. I chose inequality, to reject inequality. Now breathe in through the nose, receiving your third boundary that you reject, and breathe out. I chose fear. And with these 3 things, these feelings that you chose to accept, know that you will continue to cultivate and nurture these feelings from within you, within your boundaries each day. And for all those that choose to test, to attempt to break, or actually break your boundaries for the 3 things that you chose to reject, know that that will be your time to act, to stand your ground, to express your boundary to others, to leave a situation, whatever action you choose, whether it's in that moment or later on. You owe it to yourself to nurture those 3 things that you created within you, within your boundaries, and to continue to reject and act on rejecting the 3 things that are outside of your boundaries. I encourage you to feel this empowerment, this sense of safety, how you can truly protect your heart, your inner child, and every aspect of you, no matter who you're with, where you go, or what you do. There's power within you, the execution of your free will sovereignty, your free will divine right, your universal right to free will is an execution through that of your boundaries. And know that in every moment, you will always have the opportunity to come back and to continue to refine these boundaries, knowing that you always created them with purpose, with intention, and with meaning, often across multiple dimensions and aspects of yourself. And when you're ready, you can come back to this moment, come back to your body, and move around if you choose. And perhaps drink some water. Okay. Well, thank you so much. That was a pleasure. So let's talk a little bit more about boundaries, and I hope that the meditation has helped you get a feeling for some of the things that you could start to explore about your boundaries. There's no perfect approach to boundaries. It's important you know that they exist, that they're real, that you can create them, and that we always have a choice. This is because we always have free will, even when those outside of us try to oppose us, enforce different boundaries upon us. It does not mean that we have to accept them. And so this is your free will, divine right to be able to accept or reject different feelings, different practices, different actions, different energies into your boundaries, or pushing them outside of your boundaries. So I feel it's time for me to share some of the questions that you have put to me on the subject of boundaries and safety. So first of all, you know who you are. I won't say your name because I didn't ask permission to share your name publicly, but you know who you are. So thank you for your questions. And the first is, asserting boundaries for me is something I'm just beginning to learn. And nurturing my inner child, who I've abandoned so many times through fear of upsetting the other person and being rejected. How do you enforce boundaries with love and softness without becoming too guarded and reactive when someone or something oversteps them? Okay. So I feel I'll take each statement and question at a time. And thank you so much for this. It really helps me help you. The first is asserting boundaries. So I feel the first aspect to asserting a boundary is, first of all, knowing and defining what a boundary is for you. So your boundaries, as we heard in the meditation, they do not need to make sense to others. You don't need to justify them to others. They're not negotiable. These are, you get to choose in your boundaries what are non-negotiable boundaries for you. And so many of our problems in our lives are manifested, are created because we're not clear with ourselves about what is a non-negotiable boundary and what isn't. And you heard me, I think I said self-love was the first thing inside of me I want to help cultivate. So you can take that feeling and say, well, what am I doing today that's going to help me with this first thing I chose to help cultivate my self-love? And for me, I've got, I'm doing this. I really enjoy doing these videos, and it really helps me process and integrate a lot of these concepts simply by talking them through with you and answering your questions. And I feel it helps me. I've also got planned today some DIY and some chores, which I'm looking forward to, because they've like our toilet upstairs is on the verge of leaking, and I know that if I fix that first, it won't leave me in a situation where I'm feeling all stressed out when I've got lots of work on to do this week. And I'm also looking forward to spending time with my family, and this helps me know that these are the things that make me feel good, because they're things that both before, during, and after, I feel that they help cultivate my self-love. None of these things are things that give me any, counter feelings or mixed feelings or intentions about that. And I chose, like, one of my boundaries on the outside that I chose to reject was about mutual. I think, did I say? I'm forgetting all three. I know one of them was hate. I think the other one was mutual respect, and the other one was mutual love, maybe. or equality. I can't remember which. Um, so you can choose any of these, right? These were just examples I was giving in the moment. So if we chose, for example, hate, and it's a really strong one, right? If I described any of those things that I plan to do today that would put me in a situation where perhaps I was around others that exhibited hatred towards me, then I would say to myself, first of all, hey, John, do you remember you created a boundary? And the boundary is that the non-negotiable boundary is people, exhibiting hatred towards you. So let's say there was a fictional place where I went to that, whenever I went to this place or this person that they exhibited this hatred towards me, then I would enact my boundary. So the first thing, rule number one, I'm going to turn my hands around like this. So rule number one is create your boundaries. Be really clear. Some practical tips are do it each day, like explore what your boundaries mean to you. Help define them. Start with the feelings, because the feelings are most powerful. Like emotions are energetically the most powerful and they mean the most to you. And then secondly, to help them become human, that you're useful in a day-to-day life, like you can put them into practice. So for example, like the hatred boundary, I would say I reject others who exhibit hatred towards me, or I do not accept behaviors from others that are of hatred, or better grammar, or like however you want to describe it. And so that could be like your little sentence. And you can do things like, I would draw like a little stick man or woman, or whatever your gender, however you identify. Like I would just have a little stick figure of myself, and then I'd draw a circle around the outside. And so the outside would have three of the boundaries that I reject. So the three things that I reject from my boundaries on the outside, and then on the inside, the three things that I accept. And then just have that picture near you, like have it, it could be the first thing you read when you wake up in the morning. It could be something that you have at your desk where you work. It could be on your phone. It could be something that you have just before you leave your house each day. And the idea is that when you create this, it creates this this subconscious programming, right? It's an affirmation. You're saying to yourself, remember, there's this boundary, this big circle around me, and that some things are cool and they get to come inside, and then some things that are not cool and they're not allowed inside that boundary. And so the next time, so when you're finding yourself, as we often find ourselves, having to assert a boundary, you first of all need to know what it is. Otherwise, you can't assert it. There's nothing to assert. And I must admit, so much of the practice of boundaries and this practice of self-love and cultivating your feeling of safety and your inner child is all about, first of all, knowing your boundaries. Because if you don't know them, you can't assert them. And assertion isn't just an action. It is a range of things. So we'll come into that in a moment. But I just want to kind of labor the point, to emphasize the point that, first of all, just being really, really clear that having clear boundaries is the most powerful thing you can do. The other steps, yes, are very powerful. But it's like this human thing we have, right? That even in the moment, if you're not able to assert yourself, just remembering the fact that you have a boundary and saying to yourself, this is a boundary that is either accepting this behavior from another person or rejecting. It doesn't matter what you do thereafter, but the first thing you must do is decide. It's your free will decision to say it's inside my circle, my bubble, my boundary, or it's outside. Okay. So let's talk about assertion. So for example, I would have challenges in my previous job, not just my previous job, lots of different companies, where for decades I've worked with customers, and in my last company, which was headquartered over on the west coast of the US, when I worked there for this global company, there was a lot of pressure to work later, because here in the UK we're 8 hours ahead of our US counterparts on the west coast, and so it was really, really common to say, could you attend this meeting? And I had some logistical challenges. For example, I had challenges like I had to get the train in and out of work, and there was a 2-hour gap from 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. And so if I missed my train, I had about 10 minutes, maybe at 10 past 6 p.m. But if I missed that train, I'd literally just have to wait either at work or at the train station for up to 2 hours, which was grim. And I didn't want to do that every day. And also at the time, my kids were also going to bed around that time. So it's the difference from me being a father in that day or just being, focused on my work. So I realized quite quickly that this was a boundary for me. And I did say when I first joined the company to my first manager, I said, I have to leave. I have to leave by 6 p.m. I can't do meetings after 6 p.m. I have to leave. And I think it's really important, first of all, just to say, when you're asserting a boundary, you don't need to say that it's a boundary. You don't need to say why it's a boundary. But sometimes, in a sales pitch, when you're trying to influence others, because, influencing others does require your story. If you want to have some bargaining with someone, and so first you would decide what that boundary is. You'd say, so I said to myself, I'm not going to be at this work any later than 6 p.m. or there's a 10-minute buffer, and that's it. And I just have to tell people that's it for the day. Anything else can wait. And I also developed this practice, which was because really this would happen multiple times a week for 8 years, right? What I would say to people is, if it's really urgent, how about I come into the office early, or you wake up early with me, my time, and I will talk to you at 9 or 10 a.m. my time, which is 10 a.m. UK time is 2 a.m. West Coast US Pacific time. And I'd start that conversation with them, because I'd be saying to them, I know that 2 a.m., might seem really harsh for you, but I said, this would just be a one-off for you. Whereas for me, if I say yes to this, even once or twice, I have to I never see my family. I would just wouldn't see them during the week. So that was a practice that I would start doing, and I'd say to people, look, it's really, really urgent. How about you get up super early and we'll talk? Or sometimes we do negotiations. Sometimes I would say, well, maybe if it's really that urgent, I could dial in from home later, but I'm going to make sure my family are down, my kids are down, and I only do this. So this is a boundary I'd have to say to myself and say, I only do this once a month. So I wouldn't even mention it. There would be nothing written down. Most of the time I was saying no to people, but when I really sensed urgency, that it was important to help others, maybe it's to help my team, that I'd want to do it. And often examples would be I would dial into very late calls when we were getting funding for the next year or 2 years or 3 years from our senior managers or very, very senior people in the company. I would sometimes I'd be in my camper van and I'd dial in and have a meeting for an hour. So these just felt like really important times for me to do it. And if you that was part of my boundary. It was the exceptional circumstances, and I had a clear qualification for that. And I just chose the levels in the company and the impact that it would have. If it was just a presentation to keep someone updated, I would just say, no, I'm sleeping. We're in a different time zone. Now, what you've I wasn't perfect at that, right? That boundary of working hours, I wasn't perfect at. I did get better and better. I wrote it down. I taught others to do it. I got my teams to practice it, and it did develop a culture. And we would talk, we'd work with our US counterparts very much like that. Now it's different now. Now that I'm working for myself, I have a lot more flexibility, but it's something I'm continually refining. My working hours, and you'll see that whenever you're looking to book me in for a session, you'll see that over time I'm like constantly tweaking that to find the best thing for me. So a bit like the meditation at the start, I'm figuring out what feels right. And if I touch on the last part, which was like how the last question you had, which was how do I enforce boundaries with love and softness? So I would say, look, it's really important for me. I really love working for this company, which I did at the time, and that I really want sustainable. I want to sustain my lifestyle. Now, since I'm based in Scotland in the UK and we're 8 hours ahead of you, it gives me the opportunity to get a lot of work done before you wake up. So if you want something urgently, let me go to sleep, just like I let you go to sleep. There's that mutual respect, mutual love thing. And then let me work in it, because I'll get like almost, 6 working hours to prepare while you're sleeping, just before you come into work. We can meet even early if you want to, like 6 or 7 a.m. your time in the US. And then what I'd do is I'd then, follow up on whatever it is they wanted. And so there was like this, that was like the first kind of the pass, like the very polite version. And then if someone said, no, John, I need you, maybe it's my manager, I need you to work late. And I would say, a bit like I told you, I said, I get multiple requests for this, and I totally understand why you're wanting me to do it. But I know that as soon as I break this boundary, and I might use the word boundary, and I did, eventually in writing, I encourage my teams to like follow this guidelines that we created together to like have a cutoff each day. For example, at 6 p.m. It was different for others, but I encourage people to go for something like that. That it then allowed us to say, well, it's becomes like a cultural norm. Is actually a cultural boundary that we had, and by culture I mean our teams is about 30 of us based in the UK, and we were all working with people every day in the US and across the different time zones in the US, Canada, and also Europe. And then eventually, if someone said to me, look, like my manager, and it happened a couple of times, they'd say, look, you almost like in a movie, you're gonna have to attend this. They would use this kind of very depending on the person, like bold and bullish language. And I would allow myself to, firstly, just allow myself to be triggered, right? Like, here comes the trigger, and it's like allowing that moment of those emotions to rise up a bit like a volcano. And then I'd allow that to see it and observe it. So not to bypass it, not to pretend it's not there. I, as a human, have this thing where my face is like often telling the story first before I can speak. So my face might be like this, or like frowning, or shocked, or like my eyebrow would often go up. And then I would say, okay, I'd just assert myself, and I'd say, I really enjoy working for this company. I want this to be a sustainable work-life balance. And it requires a lot of hours from me each day. I have to work, I'm already working like 8, 10, 12 hours in a day. Finishing at 6 p.m. makes a huge difference. There's a difference between me watching my children grow up or not. So there's that kind of story to help explain. But I don't need to explain any of that, right? I could just say no. So this is like the softer approach. And then eventually it was still pushed. Then eventually, this is where the assertion you have to draw a line, right? Your own line. So it doesn't matter what company policies are. It doesn't matter what a boss said to you or didn't say to you. It doesn't matter if you thought differently before. if this is a new boundary for you, or it's a boundary that you've allowed it to be eroded, whatever the status is, in that moment, if you've now decided this is your boundary, stopping work at 6 p.m., then I would say if I'm to stay in this company, this is non-negotiable for me. So this means that if this just doesn't work, like if me not being able to work to 6 p.m. is somehow an impact on my performance, and that it's not acceptable to you as my manager, then perhaps I'm not in the right company. And it's shocking to them, right? Because they're like, oh, like, I don't want you to leave. Like, they're hoping to just have a middle ground, kind of, push you about a bit and get over that challenge in the day and just get on with the next thing. They didn't want suddenly this to escalate, and suddenly that they're having a conversation about someone leaving or threatening to leave. And you can reaffirm yourself and say, look, there's so much of the things that I love inside of my boundaries. So you don't need to use that language, but you say, I love like the mutual respect, the how you encourage me to look after my self-care, taking regular breaks, encouraging me to have a good work-life balance, being sustainable in what I do and not just burning myself out. I already work really hard, and by the end of the day, I'm just really, really tired. So if I'm pushed or continually asked to, or told to work beyond this boundary for me, then it's unfortunately just wouldn't be a place that I could stay in longer term. Now, you don't need to quit in the moment. You don't even need to necessarily object in that moment. You could say to yourself, okay, John, we're going to, this boundary stands, right? The assertion still stands, but this is not the time for me to confront them. And now you're kind of borrowing a bit of like self-karmic debt, right? You're saying to yourself, okay, we'll do it once, and then we'll come back to it. Because sometimes maybe you're not brave enough. Maybe you're too scared. Maybe you're just feeling like, I don't have the courage in this moment. Like me, I often found it really hard to be in the moment and just say, no, it's a non-negotiable boundary. You get me up to 6 and that's it. If it's a problem, let's have a separate meeting about my performance and whether I should be in this company or not. And that would be like the brutal version of it, right? But there were times I said, okay, but just so you know, I do not work past 6 p.m. and except for exceptional circumstances. And I'd like to meet with you or cover this in our next one-to-one and talk through this in more detail. So these are all acceptable, right? This is all completely up to you. And then the third thing is acting. So first thing is identify your boundaries, so define them. The second is asserting them, so making sure that when they're tested, that there's like this initial like push, like at least the energy of it is no, this is a boundary, this doesn't feel good to me, and the acceptance that it does not feel good to you. And all the things that go with it, like we're saying, like you might feel a bit triggered, you might be verbalizing or not to others at that time. And then thirdly, acting on it. Thirdly, acting on your boundaries. So let's imagine, first of all, that you never told anyone your boundaries. So number one was you didn't tell anyone that you would always stop work at 6 p.m. And so when someone asked you to, and the boundary was tested, you didn't work, you didn't do it. And then, or should I say you did or didn't work past 6 p.m. in that moment. And then the third step was the next day you resigned and you didn't explain why. What of it? Like, it's your free will, right? It's your free will to define that boundary. And it might seem really silly to some people. Some of you might be watching this thinking, oh, 6 p.m., it's maybe not that late. Or maybe you're thinking it's already really late. Now, bearing in mind, I was working about 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. And it would take an hour for lunch. But they were really intense, often back-to-back meetings all the way through the day. So know that you can just act, right? But the most important thing about acting, and I say acting, not like you're pretending, I mean, actually taking action, is that you're saying to yourself, you're saying to your heart, to your inner child, I'd be saying it to little John, I'd be saying, no, these boundaries are here for a reason. I am rejecting this situation. I'm rejecting this person or people who are acting against my boundaries, and I'm taking action. And so it doesn't matter whether or not you say in your resignation letter, I am leaving because you broke my boundaries. None of that matters. What matters to you is you're saying to your little inner child, so this little version of you inside, and saying, together we form our boundaries. And when they're tested, asserted, and broken, we take action. Now, how do you think it makes your inner child feel? Well, in the moment, your inner child will hopefully feel like, yes, I knew it. Adult John, Big John, is like taking responsibility and saying, no, this is not acceptable. And this is a breach of my boundary. And so I'm taking action. And it means that you feel like your castle walls, like your big protective bubble around you, is even stronger, right? You're saying, look, someone tried to break it, or someone did break it, and now I'm pushing them back out. I'm taking us out of that situation, and now we're going to feel safe, and we're going to be okay. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, oh, but what happens next? And so this is where we're very human, right? So that the non-existent fourth thing that you're left with is, well, I defined a boundary about 6 p.m. working. It was tested. I handed in my notice. And then what? Are you left with, are you in even more fear than you were before? Are you feeling like even worse? Maybe you're worried that you're going to have to go and find another job or settle for something that has even less of a work-life balance. Maybe your visa for working in that country, or maybe your healthcare, or all these things are tied to that employment. So the reality is you have to deal with that, right? And you can't ignore it. But does that mean that you should change your boundaries? Well, guess what we do most of the time, and I've done this a lot in the past, is I would make that mistake of saying, oh, well, I get paid a lot of money and I quite enjoy the job and the people. I'll just work beyond 6 p.m. more times. Maybe I'll do it 2 times a week, have a chat with my wife. Yeah, I think I can do 2 times a week, and I'll do that. And gradually we get this like boundary bleeding effect where it would become wishier and washier, and that boundary would just become eroded. And eventually I'd find myself having a conversation often with my wife or kids saying, yeah, these last few months have just been really hard. Like I just feel so drained. My work-life balance is terrible. I don't see you guys in the evenings. I can't help you with homework. It's harder to do things as a family together in the evenings. What went wrong? And suddenly I resent working in that place. And if I go all the way back, I remember, you often remember setting yourself that boundary thinking, oh, that's something that I should have maybe enforced more strongly or got clearer about. So know that you have to be prepared to take action. Otherwise, the whole boundary exercise is pointless, right? You may as well not have any boundaries. You may as well just say to yourself, oh, it's okay if someone just asks me to work any crazy hours. I'll just accept it. And then what are you left with? What is the life that you're left with? And are you willing to accept that life? Will it make you happy? Will it cultivate your inner child, your feeling of safety? So this example of working hours, which I've focused on a lot, it applies to everything, right? Like the relationships that you're in, your partnership, your marriage, even the relationships you have with friends and family. For example, I have a boundary that is if someone reacts either in person or online negatively towards content that I create, that in the moment I review what it is that they've done and the energy that they've shared, and I will consider it a boundary for me to not tolerate it. And my boundary was always just to reject. So I'd block people all the time. And it's, I've been running this YouTube channel for many years, going back about, I don't know, 15 years or so. But in earnest, with regular content for the last 7 years. So it's a lot of people that are blocked. And a lot of it's just troll activity, and some of them are really funny. I'm not inviting more troll comments, but when people just call you creepy or whatever, I used to just hide it. I wouldn't get into an argument about it. And then more recently, in about the last couple of months, I decided first of all, I acknowledge it as a boundary, and I do not tolerate that behavior either from someone in person or not. It doesn't matter if you're a family member or if you're a friend or a customer or whoever you are. In order to create that feeling of safety within me, I have to have a strong boundary. Now, most of the time, if the comment isn't too inappropriate for others to read, as I'm conscious what others read, I'll often respond in humor. So, for instance, there's someone that said to me, this guy seems like a cult leader. And I just wrote back and said, I am, join us. and even the troll responded and laughed. And I thought, it was, if my humor doesn't make it clear that it's a boundary for me, I would never enter that argument and say, oh, you can't say that, or don't say that, or, I'm not a cult leader, blah, blah. There's no point in arguing with it. And you don't need to argue with people about your boundaries. Just the same when I've had friends in the past who have either commented online or in person about some of the content I produce, like, hey, John, what happened to you? You're so different now, and the stuff you share is so strange to me. If I feel that it's quite negative and disrespectful that they're saying to me, then I might not do it first of all, but they'll be on my kind of watch list, which is just a mental thing. It's not written, of course. And then, if it happened again, I'll block them. I think now I just tend to do it. I just go, you don't need to watch my content. And every time I see you, all you do is complain about it. So my first thing is I'll block it, and I'll block your access. And then the second thing is, I'll also think about my other boundaries about, do I want you in my life? And these are, some of these things are really hard, right? What if this is the closest person to you in your life behaves like this, is continually breaching a boundary? You'd be like, oh, what do I do? And I don't think there's any harm in continually going back to your boundaries and refining them, but try and avoid this this kind of downward spiral where you just go, oh, but I love them, and then you degrade your boundary. I love them, degrade your boundary. And eventually, if it was the working hours, you'd suddenly be working to midnight. If it was troll comments, that they'd be berating you publicly to others, or, to your family and friends. And you'd just be like, oh, it's okay. I love them. I'll let them do whatever they want. These are not acceptable behaviors, because you've defined what's acceptable. You've defined your own boundary. Okay. And then nurturing your inner child. So one thing I would say that I found really helpful for me was my inner child would sometimes get scared of, going into client sessions, for example, especially some of the harder work that I do, negative energy and entity removal sessions. If I wasn't fully protected with my own boundaries, that I'd had time to prepare, if I felt so much compassion and empathy and sympathy for my clients that I would potentially erode my boundaries, have the session run over in time, allow them to behave negatively towards me. If those feelings, if that ever came up within me, I would not always protect myself in the past. And it left my inner child feeling really unsafe. And it made me feel unsafe going into the very work that I love. And it's like, John, how can you be scared of or worried about, or why is your inner child scared of going into a client session in the very work that you love doing in your dream life? And so that's when I revisited my boundaries. And so now I see, like, imagine this is your inner child, and then wrapped around this big golden bubble. No matter where this bubble travels, whatever client sessions you do, wherever jobs you work in, whatever relationships you're in, there's this protective layer around you. And so it's always protecting this little heart, your inner child, every aspect of you. And so cultivating safety is really a benefit as a result of you having strong boundaries. So if you can create a strong boundary around yourself and say, look, no matter what happens, I will always honor my boundaries, that I created them for good reason. And even if that they're never going to be perfect for me, and I'll always continue to refine them, but I will not erode them or degrade them in any way just because someone else, challenges them. If anything, it should make them stronger and help you make them even crisper and clearer. And yeah, the fear of upsetting other people and being rejected, like these are really real things, like, and they happen. And I think ultimately you do have to, at some point with your boundaries, we're often challenged for a reason, and the universe is, giving us these people to test our own boundaries. Eventually you have to say no. You have to say, this isn't happening. And know that it's a much healthier thing to unfortunately upset someone else, or to for them to reject you because of a boundary that you've created, and not because of, and because ideally it was the first boundary you created. It was the 6 p.m. and end of working day. It wasn't they didn't reject you at the 11 p.m. Likely is that if someone's asking you, for example, to work lots more hours, or their loved one is trolling your comments in your comments or DMs in your content you're creating, or you're constantly pushing you to do things you're uncomfortable with, then there's underlying challenges. These are just the symptoms, and there's underlying root causes that your boundaries will help raise the visibility of. And it's much better to be, this happy little healthy inner child with a big protective bubble around you, out by yourself in the universe, having to deal with everything yourself, but knowing that you will bounce around these different relationships and companies you work for and places you live, constantly trying to find a match, right? You're trying to find a place that either they haven't heard of your boundaries, and that when they do, they're accepting of them, or you move on, right? And these are cycles that are tough and are challenging and are fearful for us to face, but know that it's really important to do so. And you were saying, how do you enforce boundaries with love and softness without becoming guarded and reactive when someone oversteps them? I think this is totally your choice, right? So, and it's one of the harder aspects of assertion and action. I'd say the first is, be aware energetically that when you create a boundary around you, when you create this circle around you, that it energetically exists, that it's real, right? It's because you've decided what's acceptable what's in your circle and what's out of your circle. And when others, how to describe it, when others are outside of that boundary, it can feel like they are a stranger. It can feel to them like they get this cold shoulder from you, even though you've said nothing and done nothing other than energetically and mentally you've created this boundary around you. And so just be aware of that. Be aware that other people, for example, in friendships and partnerships, can feel lonely if they're on the outside of your boundaries, even though they're right next to you, and maybe next to you a lot of the time. This is real, right? Doesn't mean to say that your boundary's wrong. It means that you need to lightly have a discussion about it, especially if you're not doing anything other than being supportive and loving to others in a friendship, for example, and yet they're saying, oh, you're so cold and distant, and you're like, wow, that's such misalignment in how I feel. Let's talk more about it and see like which of your boundaries are being tingled when you're having these conversations with them. So like that spider sense feeling, your intuition. The other thing I'd say is with love and softness, some people will choose to give an early heads up. So I sometimes describe this as like a little happy, helpful fairy outside of your castle wall. Maybe it's a mile out, a radius around your castle wall, and it's this really happy version of you. It starts really polite, right? So for example, the working hours. Imagine my old manager was running at the castle wall at 100 miles an hour. And what first interrupts them or grabs them attention is, hey, remember John never seems to work past 6 p.m. And then like they keep running at the castle wall. And then eventually, as they get closer, it's like, hey, John's always looking for a sustainable work-life balance and looking for ways to improve this and support, a long, happy life and productive life and doing great results for customers. Please don't ask him about his working hours. And then you get all the way up to the boundary. And then eventually it's no. It's like, no, I'm not doing it. Or I did it once and this was the consequence. I'm now leaving the company. Like, or, you're saying this is the once off. I'm writing you an email telling you it's the last time it ever happens. If you ask me to do it again, then I'll leave the company. Like these seems like really strong conditions and demands you're placing on others. And they might fill you with some fear. They might be saying, oh, I don't know what's going to happen. I literally have nothing else to do if I leave that company. But know that if it really is a boundary for you, you have to stand by it. And you get to choose how you stand by it. And I think the cold hard reality is that when you do exert a boundary, then of course you can take time. I'd often take like 24 hours. It's amazing what happens in 24 hours to reflect on it. I would sometimes tell, if it was a manager, for example, I'd say, look, I'm unhappy about the situation. Let's talk tomorrow about it. You don't need to go into the details of like 6 p.m. versus 7 p.m. or like all the details of why. Just give yourself time to collect your thoughts and reflect on it and know that it's almost like something has breached your castle walls, your boundaries, and you're saying to yourself, so we're going to figure out a plan to deal with it. Don't just leave it and don't just go, let's just make the boundary 7 p.m. Like that's not going to solve the problem, right? Or unlikely to. That feel into the root causes. Maybe you'll go back to this meditation at the start of today's almost hour-long video. Okay. And then like being guarded and being too guarded and overreactive. There are challenges with being too guarded, right? And this is also something you have to feel into. And I feel like one way I do this is by continually refining the boundary itself. Like I feel like you can put more weight on the definition of the boundary so that it doesn't feel too guarded. And perhaps my troll comments is one way I've been doing that, where I used to just block people, and now I feel like, well, I can just have some fun with it in the moment. And like I was saying, I am a cult leader. Like that for me was, I did react when I first saw it, and you're just thinking, oh, humanity, like why do we do this to each other? Why are people hating on each other? And I get to choose how I respond. Do I block them? Do I just delete the comment and they could repeat it again at some point in the future? Do I make a joke about it and in a way that is almost like meeting hatred with love and humor? Like you get to decide. And so as we come to an end, I would like to share one more practice that I do. So for example, on my website, I have the privacy statement and the guidelines for like the kind of policies, and they're quite short. they're inspired by things like our membership group, rules of engagement with each other, like how to be respectful towards each other. And what I found really helpful was, because I'd written it down and I'd made it public, that whether it's a customer or a stranger or even myself, I can look at what's written and decide whether a boundary has been broken. And then if a boundary has been broken, I can then go and take action. And so now I have a little sheet, I have a little one-page document, and every time something happens, I record it. And I just say like the date and time. It's like a one sentence, date and time, this thing happened. Like one of the first things that happened is someone tried to hack my website. And so I put that as a boundary. I said, no, you're not allowed to do that. And then I also took a note of the improvements that I made. And so it's that kind of the root cause analysis, like why were they allowed to do this? Like what was the vulnerability in my website? What was the boundary that they broke, and what's the action I'm taking? And then this allowed me really to go on and just continue to improve the boundary itself. So I started to change some of the really simple things, like having expiries on offers. Like it's a really common thing, it's a really simple thing to do, but it keeps the energy very tidy whenever I now create something, everything from a payment link to a voucher to loyalty points, like whatever they are on my website, there's like an end date to it. So it naturally cycles off. Even if I do nothing, it'll take care of itself. And so that was like one of my first lessons that I took. And I implemented and I updated my boundaries as a result. So you might want to create your own little list, like little self-improvement list of like continually improving your boundaries. And you know what's really, really reassuring is it gives you this like practice, like this almost like emotional muscle memory where you're saying to your heart, this happened, it was quite traumatic. Often I do get triggered and reactive, but allow that storm to rise, to see what it is in you. Why is it happening? Why is it so important to you? Remind yourself about what's the fundamental core of that emotion at the bottom of that, the underlying reason why you have that boundary. Is it like self-love? Like what is it? And then allow yourself to ride through that storm a bit, let it settle a little bit, write it down if you want to, and then figure out your plan. Maybe take 24 hours and respond. And so everything's so much easier 24 hours later. But you can do it in the moment too. It's totally up to you. Well, that's us come to an end. I'd like to thank you so much for today's video, and thank you for your questions. If you have more subjects you'd like me to cover, please do. And I look forward to, I'm almost, this is my last day of my vacation, so I'm back to work tomorrow. In fact, I actually have a client session tonight. And yeah, looking forward to helping serve you more and more each day. So thank you so much, everyone. Take care. And I'm sending my love from Scotland. Thank you. Bye.